Hi, thanks for watching. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about helplessness and kind of follow on the last video that we had. And start off by telling you a little bit of a little story. A few years ago, my family decided to go whitewater rafting in Colorado. We took myself, my wife, my two kids, and my in-laws. And we went through all the training and everything, got on the raft, decided that my wife and my father-in-law would be on one side, myself and my mother-in-law would be on the other side, and my 10-year-old decided she wanted to paddle, so she didn't want to sit in the middle. And we let her do that, and the guide said it was okay, no problem, not a big deal. So we're heading off down the river. The guide's telling us when to paddle, when not to paddle, all those kinds of things, and everything's going pretty well. We come up over a rock, and he's telling us to paddle. And we noticed at the time, we're actually looking back later, that my wife and my father-in-law was so concerned about my daughter that they weren't really paddling. So if you've ever been in a boat before, you recognize that if you have two people on one side, two people on the other side, two of them are paddling, only one side of the boat's going, which means you're turning. So as we got up over this rock and we hit into this kind of a whirlpool of water, not a big deal if everybody's paddling and we're going over. When one side's paddling, you turn. And so what ends up happening is I'm on the bottom, right? The boat turns, it starts to flip up, we're in the water. It's level 2 rapids. It's not terrible, but it's a terrible thing when your 10-year-old and your 12 or 13-year-old daughter are in the water. Because I was on the bottom, I shot out in front of everybody else, and I can't find anybody. And so I remember the training, right? I remember the training is you kind of lean back, you kind of ride it out until you're able to get to a spot. Don't put your feet down, don't put your legs down and get caught on rocks. Only one problem with that. I had kids in the water. And so I'm trying to stand up and look behind me and trying to figure out where the kids are. And the whole time I'm getting beat like crazy. I still have lots of scars. Rocks are hitting my legs. I'm getting hit on my arms. I'm getting hit everywhere. Right? The raft comes floating by. I grab the raft. By the way, not a good thing to do because this just beating me to death now. And I'm probably going another, 20 or 30 yards before I realized that on the other side of the raft was my wife. She was holding on. At one point, I think I was swimming upstream, or at least trying to. But eventually I got to the side, got the raft to the side. My wife was on the other side. I kind of swung it around, did the thing you shouldn't do. I planted my foot on a rock and just kind of swung it around. And then kind of climbed out of the water. And at that moment, I remember just all the adrenaline just leaving my body. And this adrenaline high I'd been on that entire time of trying to find the kids, trying to turn around, trying to grab the raft, trying to swim, all those kinds of things was just gone. And my body was just zapped. I couldn't move. My wife's standing up, yelling, "Where are the kids?" and trying to figure out what's going on with them. I'm doing the same, looking around. And all of a sudden we see the kids floating by on a raft. And they're just waving at us like no big deal. Well, come to find out, our guide, who was a big man, a Herculean kind of man, was able just to stand up in the water. He just stands up and grabs both kids and walks them over to the side. Not a big deal. For us, that was a big deal, obviously. But we got them back in the boat. We were able to finish and get out kind of at the midway point. But the thing, looking back over that, right, it took a few days for me to really kind of comprehend and process all of that. And the thing I remember most about that was this feeling of helplessness. This feeling of, my kids are in the water. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to save them. I don't know if anything's going to happen to them. I'm in the water. And although I've gone through the training, I'm feeling kind of helpless because I'm at the mercy of the water. Whatever it wants to do with me, it can pretty much do. And I remember feeling that big feeling of helplessness. And so today I want to kind of talk a little bit about that helplessness as it relates to our previous message or our previous video around pornography and the dangers of pornography. We talked then about how it affects the kids, our generation, new generation of kids, teens, those kinds of things. Today I want to talk about, how it affects everyone else, adults, people who have been, in this world a lot longer. I want to talk a little bit about, what we can do to try to help anybody who might be suffering from these kinds of things. We'll talk a little bit about the brain part, the brain science of it, and some of the paths to recovery. When we talked about the pornography in youth, we did kind of touch on a little bit brain science. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today in depth and just kind of have you understand what that kind of means. Essentially when someone engages in watching pornography or something like that that gives them kind of a high, there's a couple things that happen. First of all, there's a chemical release in the brain, and that release is dopamine, and that's a kind of a drug in the brain. It's generally referred to as the happy drug. And what you'll see a lot in this is even in things like if you're spending time with your kids or things that you like to do or enjoy doing, things that make you happy. Some people love to go fishing. Some people like to play golf. Some people are thrill seekers. They like to jump out of airplanes, go ziplining, go rappelling, whatever. Those kinds of things that provides kind of a high. You see it a lot in gambling addiction. You'll see it in sex addiction, pornography addiction, those kinds of things, because it's internal. It's a behavior that releases kind of an internal release of dopamine, or the happy drug, that basically says, I like that. That reinforces that behavior, right? Because it makes me feel good in some way. The other part of that is an oxytocin. Oxytocin is released as well. And this is sometimes referred to as a love hormone, but basically it's an attachment, right? It basically says, if I release this dopamine and I really enjoy that, oxytocin kind of says, well, I want to do that again. These types of chemicals are at high levels, like in the courting phase when you first meet someone, right? Doing a lot of things. I want to spend as much time with them as I can, right? And you create this attachment to them. So those two kind of things go hand in hand. The problem comes in and the confusion comes in is there's a moral dilemma there, right? Especially when you're talking about pornography. I think most people know that pornography inherently is morally wrong, right? It's exploitationist. People, I think, intuitively understand that it has a negative effect on them, certainly over time. The fact that it has to be 21 and up or 18 and up, whatever, depending on where you live, those types of things tell you that it's something that can't be comprehended by a youth or a kid's brain. So all those things kind of tell you that there's kind of this moral dilemma there. So you're releasing these chemicals in your brain that says, I like this is good, it reinforces this behavior, but I know it's wrong. So how do I deal with that? That's usually when this feeling of helplessness kind of results, especially over time. And as we talked in the last one about youth and kids who start kind of getting hooked on that earlier, and we talked a lot about today's culture and how easy it is and how frequent it is now. It's almost a new norm. Over time, that becomes kind of a hook. And that hook is kind of a vicious cycle, right? There's this, I know I've experienced this in some way. I've went through some trauma, or I've seen this at a young age, and I know that made me feel good because of these chemicals are releasing in my brain, so I know it feels good. But I know I have this dilemma. I know I don't like this necessarily, especially when I'm done, right? But it makes me feel good at the moment. So how do I deal with that? And the reality is, over time, you can't deal with it yourself. What happens is you get this feeling of helplessness. And this helplessness is kind of part of this vicious cycle. It says, I feel terrible about this because I know it's morally wrong. But I know what makes me feel good, and these aren't conscious thoughts, but I know it makes me feel good, and so I go do that again, and then I feel bad again because I have this moral dilemma. And it's just a vicious circle over and over. So what do you want to do about it? What do you do about it? A lot of people say, are you talking to me, right? People, and there's an argument that says, well, some pornography is not a big deal, or I watch it with my significant other or my spouse, and we enjoy it together, and all those kinds of things that kind of minimizes the effects of it. Well, the reality is the effects are the same. It doesn't matter who you watch it with. It doesn't matter who you get permission from. The reality is that the effects are the same. Over time, that maps your brain, as we discussed in our previous video, in a way that ruins intimacy. You see other people as sex objects, whether you're a man or a woman. And it's predominant in men, but it happens in women as well. And you start seeing that as an act, not as an outpouring of intimacy and outpouring of love. So there are a few questions that you can ask yourself, though, that says, if I've ever felt that way, if I've ever felt that feeling of helplessness, or if I've ever felt that feeling of, man, I really wish I wouldn't have done that, and I'll never do that again, but then you do it again. There's some questions that you can ask yourself that kind of give yourself a self-assessment, if you will, to understand, is this something that you're struggling with a little bit? So one of those questions is, do you keep secrets about your sexual behavior? Pornography, strip clubs, any of those kinds of things. Do you go to those places or view those kinds of things in a way that you don't share with your significant other, or maybe even other people in your life? Do you keep it a secret? If it's something you're keeping a secret, and anything you're keeping a secret, you need to question yourself. Why am I keeping that a secret? What makes that secretive for me? And what makes that so important that I can't share that with the people that I love and that love me? Second thing is, has it ever jeopardized a relationship? Have you ever been, caught going to a strip club, or caught using pornography, or any of those types of things, and it jeopardized a relationship? More importantly, going back to question number one, if my current spouse or significant other were to catch me in that situation, would that jeopardize my relationship? Third thing, legal problems. Have you ever been in a situation that has caused you potential legal problems, either now or in the future? Are you engaging in something today that might be illegal? Prostitution, massage parlors, those kinds of things. If you're engaging in those kinds of things, that means that you're placing the feeling or the euphoria that you're getting from those things above what potentially could be a legal threat to you in jail. So if you're placing those types of things higher than the risk of going to jail, that's an obvious item to look at that might be causing you some real helpless feelings. Number 4, does it conflict with your own moral standards? Generally, people grow up with some type of moral standard. As I mentioned earlier, I think most people understand or probably agree with, evenly from a moral perspective, that pornography, exploitation of others, all those types of things are inherently immoral. But it's really easy to rationalize those things away because of the way it makes you feel. So take a real good, close look at your moral standards. Do those things kind of conflict with that? And if they do, probably want to give that as a second time look. The last thing is, how do you feel after? After you come home from a strip club, after you watch pornography, after you engage at a massage parlor or whatever, how do you feel about it? Are you okay, no problem? Or is there a feeling of hopelessness? Is there a feeling of anxiety? Is there guilt? Is there shame? If there are guilt or shame after any type of action that you take, you need to look more closely at that action and understand what's driving that and what you can do about that, right? That's causing some anxiety in you. That's going to create that circle, and you're just going to do it again. So if you answered yes to any one of these, you might need to look at some introspection. You might need to ask yourself some questions. You might need to understand that I need to get some help. I can't do this alone. The good news is it's not a life sentence. If you're in this struggle, if you're dealing with this, it's not something you have to deal with forever. Your brain can be adjusted. It requires work and it requires commitment, but it's something that can be done. So, what kind of work? Well, there's all kinds of different things, right? There's therapy, there's groups, there's admitting that there's a problem. There's all these kinds of things that are important to recovery. But there has to be this understanding that I want to do something about it. It's not something that I want in my life. And if there's that understanding, you have to be willing to make that commitment and do the work, and do the hard work. Lies and secrets have no power in the light. If you have those types of things, if you have secrets that you're hiding, if you have things that you need to get rid of, you have to bring them to light. As long as they are secrets, they will have power and they will have control over you. In 1 James 14 through 15, he says, "But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death." So, James uses the analogy of human conception and birth to describe sin. And then desire is conceived when a person yields to that temptation, which results in the birth of a sin. So as sin matures and becomes complete, this ultimately leads to God's judgment of death. And so from a spiritual perspective, that's where the morality comes from. Right? I don't want to get into that long conversation right now, but moral standards were kind of were handed down from the Bible. They're handed down from God, from Jesus Christ. So when people talk about morality, you can't really talk about morality and separate the spiritual aspect of it, because they're one and the same. Where else would you get them? Okay, in Romans chapter 8, verses 38 and 39, Paul says, "For I'm convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord." What does that mean? In other words, there's nothing, let me say this again, there's nothing that you can do to make God not love you. Nothing. I know something about this, right? I mean, there's this feeling of, oh God, if these people just knew what I've done, there's no way that they could forgive me. There's no way that these people could live with me if they knew what I've done. I'm telling you, that's not true. That's the devil making you believe those things and making you rationalize the behavior. It's not, absolutely not true. So what do? You have to open your heart. And this is not just a message or a sermon or a priest or preacher about preaching about, hey, open your heart and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior. That's all true, but you have to be able to open your heart to recognize a couple of things. First one we just mentioned, can't do it alone. Right? You cannot do it alone, I can promise you that. The second thing is that there is absolutely nothing you can do that God is not going to love you. Nothing. Our God is a God of peace, love, and forgiveness. Open your heart and your mind to a better life. Stop living the lie. It can only lead to death. Is it hard? Yeah. Is it risky? Absolutely. Might you lose your relationship? Yeah, that's a maybe. But is it worth it? Absolutely. I mean, think about it. You cannot be who you need to be for yourself, for your kids, for your spouse, for your family, for whomever, if you're not complete with yourself. And part of that is losing the lies. Part of that is understanding that I have flaws, I have character defects, I have faults. I've got things that I've got to deal with, and before I can be who I need to be for the people that I love and that love me, I've got to take care of me. It has to be something that is within you. You have to feel it. You have to understand that you can't do it alone. Can't do it alone. So you may be asking yourself, well, who are you? What makes you the expert? Well, I've talked about it a little bit in previous videos, and I'll touch on it again a little bit now. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and for years I struggled with these same types of things. I destroyed relationships. I destroyed people. I destroyed my life in a lot of ways. But I was extremely lucky. I mean, it was over 30 years, but I finally figured it out. I finally reached a point that said, I just don't want to live that way anymore. I can't live that way anymore. It will lead to certain death. Once I realized that, there's nothing I can do that can make God not love me, and that feeling of hopelessness and helplessness goes away, because there's a feeling of worth now, right? A feeling that says, I'm worth it. You got to have that feeling. You got to want that feeling, even if you don't have it now, right? You have to be able to say to yourself, I'm worth it. So I pray that anyone watching this and needs help, wants to reach out, find it. Reach out to your local pastor. Reach out to recovery sites and groups, therapists. There are some really good therapists that can help. Feel free to reach out with me, and I'll help guide you wherever you need to go. My website is jasonlhalbert.com. Go there. I've got a Facebook page on there, Twitter on there, Confessions of a Christian Dad for Facebook. Please take a look. Read the blog. Anything that can help you, I'm absolutely willing to do. Remember, there's faith, there's hope, there's love. God tells us this. And my prayer is that you'll find it. Thanks for watching. God bless.